Hello, everyone. Welcome and happy Thursday. Thank you very much for tuning in to the Brooklyn Rail's 1078th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, the Programs Associate here at the Rail, and today I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC for a conversation featuring Omar Berrada, Tracy Grinnell, Safaa Fathy, and Swensen. And now I will introduce our guests and host for today. Omar Berrada is a writer, curator, and translator whose work focuses on the politics of translation and intergenerational transmission. He's the author of the poetry collection Clonal Hum and the editor or co-editor of several books, including Another Room to Live in, 15 Contemporary Arab Poets, which came out this year. His writing was included in numerous exhibition catalogs, magazines, and anthologies, and currently lives in New York. Tracy Grinnell is the author of Hell Figures and Portrait of a Lesser Subject, among others. Her poetry, essays, and visual art have also appeared in a wide range of collections and publications. Grinnell's poetry has been translated into French, Serbian, Polish, and Portuguese, and she's taught at several universities. She lives in Brooklyn and is the founding editor and executive and artistic director of Litmus Press. And Safaa Fathy was born in Egypt. She is a poet, essay writer, and filmmaker. Her most recent publication is Where Not to Be Born, translated by Rawad Z. Webbe, and translated into English and Arabic. And it was published by Litmus Press. Fathy's Name to the Sea, a film poem structured within a still frame, is being published along with the text in 7 languages. She is working on a novel in English. And our host today, Swensen, is the author of 20 volumes of poetry, most recently and, as well as a collection of critical essays called Noise That Stays Noise. A former Guggenheim Fellow, she has been a finalist for the National Book Award and the LA Times Book Award, and has been awarded the Iowa Poetry Prize, the SF State Poetry Center Book Award, and the National Poetry Series. She's also translated over 20 volumes of poetry, prose, and art criticism from French, and won the 2004 PEN USA Award in Literary Translation. It's so wonderful to have you all on our program today, and I'm thrilled to turn it over to you, Cole, to get us started.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for coming. This series is meant to honor the people who are often unacknowledged behind the production of poetry. And so we're really, really grateful to have Tracy with your wonderful press, Omar and Sarah implicitly for the wonderful collection, and Safaa for all of your amazing film and poetry work. So let's start off with some of the poetry itself. We'll start with poems from Safaa. Thanks.
Well, thank you all for receiving me. This is not the first time I am with Brooklyn Rail. It has been a few times before, and it has been always wonderful to be with you and to be in your company. And thank you, Cole, for inviting me to this event. I'm going to read a very small text, which is unpublished, which is from a collection in Arabic called Handmade Grenade. And I'll read it. It's very small, so I'm going to read it in Arabic and English. And then I will read a poem from Name to the Sea, just in English. So I will start with The Handmade Grenade and the poem called Our Father. أبانا واحدة وواحدة منا تعرف يوما بعد يوم إنك لم تكن رحيما، إنك لم تأكل الكرز الذي كان ينزف من أجلك، إنك لم تترك مكانا لوحدة الكون. اكتفيت بصورة الأرض التي تخفيني، النسور عالقة بالأزرق في مرآة تنعكس عليها حبات العرق التي مسحتها عن جبينك عن جبينك وأنت تموت كإنسان آلي. Our Father, each and every one of us women knows day after day that you have not been merciful. You didn't eat the cherries that were bleeding for you. You have left no room for the oneness of the universe. I settled for one picture of the earth that enfolds me. The eagles are stuck in that blue, in a mirror reflecting the beads of sweat that you wiped from your forehead while you have been dying as a robot. Second text is in English, it's a bit longer. It starts with a quotation from a Sufist, Arabic Sufist. Quote, "And he said unto me, where you place my name, there shall I place yours." End of quotation. I will not suspend my shadow from a clothesline, but cast it at the road's bend, then come across you while you leave me for her. Inexorably, you will overtake me. As for me, I will amuse myself with the letters of my name that slipped from me one morning and scattered in a mountebank's house, in his chest or in his theater, in his play, in his magic, and in my childhood that I urge to be furtive, not because it is a flight of birds that I lead to their nest at night, but also a promise that left me following that same shadow, my shadow swallowing sleep. When the pool above the raven began to tremble, after a silver fish wriggled its way into her depths, the shiny fish that always slips between my fingers when I seek the phrases aligned like bricks between the two limits, so as to make of them my house, or my room, or my bed, there where I have no motherland, in the one of the land to the land, in the one of the fatherland to my fathers, there where this name borders what my mother planted, and her tongue is a shoot in the muddy patch of my childhood, the tongue she put in my mouth and which became a mother in the place of the mother tongue. On the edge of the furrow at its line, I stop. You pull me with a rope towards the trace, towards the blue sheet, and just as you howl into my ear in some odd tongue, I will murmur into yours in ultimate tongues. I will invade you with a flood of many things and become a straw on the inside, for they have slit the youngest throat, for they have replaced him with an effigy of straw, for they revel in maneuvering across my body so that the milk beads from the illusion of the mother. When the son's skin hid the absence, the mother to the mother continues to say her tongue with the milk that flows above the shadow in the illusion of the mother, when the sacrifice was a decisive act, when the truth has wept, because I am the very illusion in a diamond's heart. When you see me in your sight, in your eye, in a quicksilver morning, when you will see the void I have left, I, in the body of the night, after you became a mother, whose breast brims with milk, my tongue may not reach. And he said to me, quote, and he who has known me, he has no life except in my knowledge. And he who has seen me has no strength except in my sight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great, great start. And Omar, if I can ask you to continue.
Sure. Thank you, Cole. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the Brooklyn Rail and for all of us for being here. I will read one poem. It should be about 5 minutes long. I sometimes write essays for artist monographs or catalogs. And lately, when I'm asked to write an essay, I have been writing poems instead, or poem essays or something like that. So this was for a book on the work of artist Kapwani Kiwanga. I'll put her name in the chat in case you want to look her up. And she asked me to write something on archives. And this was it. It's called Demise by Description on Archives. Silent surroundings, wooden expanses, a heavy hush of shelves, a stack of documents sealed with centuries of dust, a struggle with history now made physical, to open or not to open, a memory too visceral for verbs. Untroubled traces of ancient crimes within these folds, voices are calling. Beyond folklore and forgetfulness, submerged lives are flooding the archive. What's in effect? I am here to materialize invisibles. Pencil in hand, like a child, I copy, or like a monk, I remake time, I blur the lines, unfossilize the past, desediment a palimpsest, build contemporaneity, unhinge hegemony, opacity is prologue. Dark water of renewal, knowledge passes through your body, washing dust off the tree leaves, a doomed sense of corporeal liberation, slow Sisyphus at work. It is not flooding, it is remembering. The archive is a trace and its ordering, a memory made alien to itself under masses of paper, a ritual of secrecy. The record lies elsewhere, waiting to be looted, abstracted, classified, atomized into worldless slivers. The archive is a temple and a cemetery, life sutured by death, demise by description, muffled violations. These remains have yet to find rest. The archive is an architecture of walls and metal cabinets. We need a formal language for throwing shade on crops, these raw materials of power imbalance. You hold a lantern to the laws like a mirror in a sea of regaled whiteness. We remember otherwise. The archive is a status and a syntax, a refuge for repression. What have we left out? They discover what we always knew. We are after other ghosts. We do not seek scandal. We are looking for ourselves. We are not stalking events. We listen for the pulse of uninterrupted life. We trace the itinerary of a disappearance. This is a prison, not a shelter. We work with absence, enigmatic pasts, far away futures, exiled meanings. We inhabit a hypothetical time, a tender trembling at our fingertips. What the archive will never know. Protective concealment, tectonic suspensions of becoming, the emotional core of incompleteness, not truth, intensity. A navigational system in the darkness of architecture. Light a candle, hold it up for the freedom ride. Forget the state, forge your resources, listen to silent voices. Sankofa is speechless, and freedom is a sound refracted by glass, the call of a conch shell in Saint-Domingue. A rebellion is afoot, a renegade retelling. New stories are possible. Unfreeze, untame, unframe, recirculate, detotemize, unleash the ghosts, let them speak, uncongeal the photographs, let the flowers wilt. Death is a part of life. Independence is never given. Your work is the archive, ephemeral, mobile, scented, unforeclosed. History articulated in matter, speculative friction, an urgency of form, changing, the tone of the world? In what idiom do we remember? The archive holds no key to your future. There is a we no collection will contain. Reanimate the traces, redefine, redescribe, perform, don't represent, exit the building. Nature too is your archive. You will not leave paper shapes to the Victorian ladies, will not concede grids to the minimalists. Let us cultivate the line and eat our crops again in a mutiny of color. Thank you.
Thank you. Great, great way to start. And now I think we've got some images that will kind of show us the constellation of activities that Litmus Press comprises. So I'll turn it over to you, Tracy.
Okay, I guess I'll just say this isn't a formal presentation, and I invite Omar, Cole, Safaa, please do jump in at any point. Sort of assembled these images, and there's kind of an arc starting with Aufgabe. I just want to say both those readings are so beautiful. Thank you, Safaa and Omar. I feel like they really just kind of, especially the archive, Omar just sets this landscape for this conversation around the press. I mean, I think I wanted to start with a line from Maren's introduction, actually, to Another Room to Live In, because I think it speaks to so much of the work of Litmus over the years. And so I'll just read this short quote. The bonds that connect us originate in an anecdotal circumstance, trivia omitted from official history or critical writing. Yet these encounters are constitutive of their outcomes, the poems themselves. They provide the affective and aesthetic environments from which the communities of artists and poets so essential to literary production emerge. So, Litmus really originated with a journal that was Aufgabe, the sort of roots of what we've done over now almost the last 25 years are in some ways in this first issue, which is why I share the table of contents. And from the very beginning, there was an investment in international exchange and conversation. So Norma Cole was our first guest editor, who I think is here. And her approach to this first section was actually to show a cross-section of some of France's poetry, small publications in France. And Leslie Scalapino, who I was working for as an intern at the time at O-Books, she contributed a section, and then Peter Neufeld and I edited this first poetry section, essay, notes, and talks and reviews. Just to sort of lay that as a kind of groundwork foundation for the press. And the next two images, I believe, so Aufgabe 5, which included some work of Omar's, and each section had this feature section of work from another country that was guest edited. And so this is issue 5. I don't know how involved, I don't remember, Omar, how involved you were in that conversation with Jalal or Guy, or if you recall any from that side of things. Yeah.
Not really beyond connecting, I think, initially.
Yeah. And I share this one because Cole Swensen was the guest editor for issue 10. We came back to France in issue 10 because, of course, we didn't have any actual poetry in the first issue. It was this nice sort of study of the editorial impulse, I think. And so, yeah, issue 10, we came back. And I think we can kind of keep moving. Oh, and here's Norma. So I was working for O-Books. I was introduced to Daniel Colbert through Norma's translation of It Then. And then this was, I think, the third book that we published with Litmus. And or from Japan is sort of a beginning of these collections that are not anthologies. And I think we'll probably get into that when we talk about Another Room to Live In, and sort of this question of anthology versus collection versus, I would say, periodical, which to me, these things kind of operate on a continuum with very different effects and impulses, I think. And this was How Phenomena Appear to Unfold, published by Leslie, second edition that we published in 2011, year after Leslie passed, and we sort of took on the O Books catalog. And this is one of Leslie's handmade early collections, her O anthologies, as she called them, which was interesting that she called them anthologies. I think there, maybe 6 poets here. And so she had a few of these kind of anthologies, O 1, 2, 3, and then started War and Peace with Judith Goldman. And I want to just point out this issue. This is a sculpture by Simone Fattal on the cover. And I'll say, I pulled these images together, not with a particular narrative in mind, but kind of drawing these, just sort of the connections, all of the intersections, and to Cole's sort of point in the beginning, the way that I think so many of us are operating in multiple ways in all of this work, whether as a poet or translator or publisher, artist, filmmaker, and I think one of the really important things is the blurring of those boundaries, that we kind of move among these roles. And yeah, I think it's one of the beautiful things about small publishing. So and then, yeah, just the Jacket 2 reissues. Sorry, there's drilling that just started up again. The Jacket 2 reissues is an amazing resource that I wanted to point out, and they've digitized a number of small journals. So all of the O Books periodicals, all of the issues of Aufgabe are now housed there, free downloadable PDFs. So becomes a kind of archive, although I think the sort of living archive, which I'd love to get into conversation with Omar and anybody else about too. Monty, who works for Litmus, who's in Berlin now. We met in London to sell some books a couple years ago. One of our virtual launches, this was about 10 years after Leslie passed, we published Hearing, which was a collaboration in the second installment. Lynn and Leslie had published Sight in 99, I think, and they had mostly finished the second installment of the collaboration that was going to move through the senses. And when Leslie passed, and about 10 years after that, it felt like it was right to publish it. The reading involved multiple people reading Leslie's parts and multiple people reading Lynn's parts, because she didn't want to be the only Lynn, she said. So it was a really wonderful celebration of that. This is in our studio with Tracy Morris, Miriam Atkin, and Rachel Wilson, who also work for Litmus. This was on the occasion of publication of Tracy's book, Human Nature Poems, a year ago. And this is a launch. This is Ada Smilbagovic, second from right as I'm looking at my screen, launch of her book, The Cloud Notebook, which was selected by Tracy Morris, in fact, in an open call. And so this is the launch, reading and conversation. Another launch with myself and Rachel Wilson for iCaustic. And so in about 2016, we also I started working with Simone Fattal, the founding publisher of Post Apollo Press. And so a large part of that is to keep Atel Adnan's early works in print. And just after Atel passed in 2021, we did a new reprint of Insomnia, a limited edition reprint, which is this wonderful contemporary series that Post Apollo did. The books are small. They're these sort of wonderful, shorter texts, but that are commissioned. Cole has a book in this series too. And again, this is Simone's artwork Simone's design on the cover of this one. And Journey to Mount Tamalpais, which this is a second edition that Omar and I worked on, and that Atel actually provided 9 new drawings for this second edition. So there's sort of a balance between reprints and new editions of the books. Just a COVID meeting and that involved a hummingbird, so I thought it was a nice image, a staff meeting. Omar, do you want to say anything about open poetics? Do you want me to keep going, or do you do you want to jump in a little? Or
I mean, I think you're better placed to say something general about open poetics and what brought you to want to do this.
Yeah, okay.
And then I can say something about
memoir. That'd be great.
Sure.
Perfect. Yeah. So the open poetics kind of came out of this conversation, what to do with these books that are out of print that that don't necessarily, for financial reasons and otherwise, it's difficult to do new printings. But really thinking, especially with this series and the sort of length of this series, I think meaning the Post Apollo contemporary poetry series, that they really lent themselves to the classroom, and I think the classroom feels like a really important place for engaging poetry, for I apologize. Just drilling is very distracting. I apologize. Yeah, so I think this is a way to kind of create a space, a context, a kind of poetics for these what could be archival works, except I sort of resist that in the sense of I think that the way in which they're still living, like to approach these as kind of presently engageable texts that still have a lot to say, I think. And so there are these digital critical editions, and it's a collaboration with CUNY on their Manifold Scholarship platform, which allows annotation of the texts. It allows us to we created a kind of template for the editions that includes archival information, includes commentary, includes, memoir, for example, had the French translation. Yeah, those are the nuts and bolts, but maybe Omar, if you want to jump in, because I think this first issue is very much about establishing the template. Right.
Yeah, there's not a lot to add, but I think it's what you said. It's much more than just archiving a text that would be too costly to reprint or something like that. It seems to fit together very nicely. These texts that are maybe 40 pages long at most, so it seems appropriate to be able to read them online. But it's also, I mean, the software or the platform is called Manifold, and it's really an unfolding of many layers of a text. So the text itself is reprinted online and annotatable and all of that, but it's also the critical apparatus. So and it changes with each project. For instance, for Joan Retallack's memoir, the French translation of the text was published in 2002 before the English edition, and I was one of the translators of the text. And I think and so it seemed meaningful to do it that way, especially as the French edition is completely out of print. There's no chance that it will be reprinted, and it's not available anywhere really. So this is where it's available. And then it was also an opportunity to bug Joan a little bit about some of the sources of her somewhat enigmatic text. This is a book of poetry that's also a kind of detective. References film noir and other and other kinds of visual and literary forms as always with Joan, as a kind of investigation of language in a way, but it was interesting to have her reference some very specific, like film posters or film scenes that inspired passages in the text, and to both kind of make some of them available on the website and also discuss them with her at the launch. So this is a book that 20 years after its publication has had a new kind of life in a way.
And this is the most recent one we've done in the open poetic series, we call it. And so and it's sort of evolved to become the last two, which previous one was Atel Adnan's From A to Z. We've done generative writing workshops, so there's a really nice kind of engagement with the text. And I think and in this case, we had Goshka Mick, who has written a really amazing critical book on Leslie's work, and gave a sort of presentation. And yeah, so I think it's something that's really does open up the text. And I think importantly, even though it's, a collaboration with CUNY, which is a very large system, it's all completely accessible. So I think really thinking about the inside and outside of the institutions and how we can kind of, bridge that, whether you are in an institution and have those resources or not. I think that the poetry needs to sort of cross those boundaries for sure. And here we are at Safaa's book, which, well, I'll say just a little bit, and I don't know, maybe we can talk a little bit about the translation too, or if we should keep moving through the slides, we can do that. I think we're almost through them, but this was such a wonderful book to work on, and that you'll notice the barcode, they're two front covers essentially, and two back covers. So the complete Arabic text and the complete English text are presented in this one volume, which certainly posed some challenges, but I think it was really such a so exciting to work this way with the texts. And yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything, Safaa, about the process or of the book, or yeah.
I don't know where to start. There's so many things to say. Perhaps I'll say about the choice of the poems, because it's like the two latest books I've written in poetry from Arabic, one in Arabic and one in French, have been translated separately in two different English books. Revolution Goes Through Walls, which is split level, and Al-Hashish, which is Pominor Press in London. So these texts here are basically texts from 88 to 2010. So they, it's like a very, they're old texts for me, but, I never write old texts, so to speak. It happens such that the way I write and the time I take to write things, I don't think, and people could say that perhaps for me, more than I would say it, but I don't feel that the poems ring at all as old of any sort. You know, there's something which is not old in them, and which won't get old. I don't know why, but this is how it is. They won't get old. So in a way, my voice like has changed a lot. Every book I write is completely different aesthetics and different syntax and different type of language. So it's like as if it's not the same person who ever wrote the first book, the second book, the third book, you know, but still there is a line, there is something very, very profound, but not cannot be grasped like at first sight like this. It's just it's incredibly profound, which of course runs across these texts, but and perhaps it has to do with my relation to time. But you could see there from an incredibly elliptical, very, very concise, bullet-like phrases from the first text to some kind of overflown metaphorical, how to say it, metaphorical exaggeration, or say perhaps metaphorical bewilderment, which happens in one night, and then we go to something completely different, Named to the Sea, or the wooden dolls. And so it's just like, you know, you know, the spectrum is quite large, and I'm quite happy to have done that with text up to 2010, because the French book doesn't have text from 2010. And Tracy was kind enough, and Omar, to accept that we add these texts, and which Rouad had really beautifully translated into English. Rouad Wahabi, who was the translator of the book. The process of translation into English was complicated. Rouad has to get used a bit to this kind of language, this kind of also this kind of overflown metaphorical. It's the most difficult text really from And One Night, and In One Night are just like, you know, this kind of mise en abîme of kind of metaphorical kind of production or generation of metaphors, which like will go of a metaphor from a metaphor from a metaphor, you know, through another metaphor, which, you know, sometimes, you know, it goes to the edge of hallucination, basically. But and that for Rouad was very difficult to translate till he, you know, started to find his way through that, you know, to go along with the, nowadays we say, the flow. So to go along with the flow, to find the kind of, it's like this kind of boat which goes into some kind of pumpy waters, which like the boat goes around here and is about to drown any time, but, you know, makes its way across or through these texts, that kind of thing. And you know, my job was to really accompany him in that and make it possible that, you know, he finds his way through this, specifically again with And One Night, a bit more also with Little Wooden Dolls, while the last texts of Named to the Sea were, I don't know why they spoke to him more than the other ones in a way, because also they were constructed completely differently as well.
I actually have a question, Safaa, and I think we talked about this maybe at some point, but I just, with the poem that you read and all of that passage about the mother tongue and the tongue, which is just amazing. And thinking about well, one, that you know, read, write, think, speak Arabic, French, and English, right? And that these poems were translated from Arabic into French. And then Rawad did back to the original Arabic, correct? And for all of the texts. And it's maybe somewhat of an abstract question, but I'm just so curious about that process. And when you're thinking about mother tongue, I mean, in some ways you could translate your own work, right? But it's a very different process, and I imagine an important process to have that interlocutor with your text in that process of translation.
I did actually translate my own work
Yeah.
into Arabic because like I was like keen to have some of my text which has been written in French to
Yeah.
have in Arabic. So I did translate
Yeah.
in Arabic. Al-Hashish, I'm in the course of translating it. Actually, I'm contracted with the translation center, but I'm been late. But yeah, I mean,
That must be very different than to bring, because that is something that you can sort of do with your own text. I'm just,
I
yeah.
do,
Yeah.
but I usually prefer working with someone, not in Arabic, because like, for somehow I seem to be kind of very jealous of my texts in Arabic, like jealous about them. I don't want anybody to touch them. But when it comes to translating into English or French, I prefer working with somebody else. And but also I am very jealous, so I wouldn't just let people in German as well, like if somebody's translating into German, I wouldn't let anybody just continue doing the thing without me intervening. Some people don't care, some just let the translator do their work or whatever. But I am not like that. I don't write. I am not prolific. I write very, small quantities of text. But they take a long, long time to come along, and I write and rewrite, so many times. So somehow I have this kind of possessive relationship to my text up to a moment, and after that they go.
Beautiful, thanks. And I'll just maybe, sorry, can we go back one slide just very quickly to comment? So this was just in April, and the Leslie Scalapino Lecture in Innovative Poetics, which started at Small Press Traffic in the Bay Area the year after she died, and was there for a couple of years then, and at Naropa. So at this point, there's one at the University of Berkeley that Lynn Haginian curated for a long time. She retired, and it's now the Lynn Haginian Leslie Scalapino Lecture in Innovative Poetics at UC Berkeley. And the lecture existed for a few years when I was teaching at Pratt, and is now housed at Bard, collaboration with their written arts program at Center for Human Rights and the Arts. And I have to give a shout out to Erica Kaufman as well for that. This is very exciting. And so Safaa was just our first lecturer there. And they're able to do a screening of her films, a sort of 2-day, focus on her work and conversation, which again, just the threads that keep sort of tying all the pieces together is, just want to mention that.
It's fantastic to be there, so, traveling on the sun eclipse, the day of the sun eclipse.
Oh, that's right. It was the day of the eclipse. Yeah, that was wild. And then we came back to New York, and we had the launch for this, which I remember you saying was the first time you and Rawad met in person, which is kind of amazing after this whole process of translation. And
that you've been old friends, because even it somehow shows you how little presence counts.
yeah. Yes. Which feels like a very nice segue to this collection coming out of the Tomas seminars. And I'll let Omar speak to Tomas that he runs with Sarah Riggs. But I think there in some ways this book so embodies all of, I think, these questions in a way of, and the how encounter is so fundamental to all of the work we do, and you know, that these are long projects, I guess I want to say, and you know, that there's many iterations, things happen and they come back around. And I just I think that's the thing that is so keeps compelling me about the work, as a poet and someone who's dabbled in translation and an editor and all of that. But yeah, Omar, I think love to hear some about the collection.
Yeah, of course. As you said, this is a book that so it was just published a few short months ago, and it does embody a lot of the connections. I mean, I could say it is through the Tamas translation seminar that Rawad got to know Safaa, even though Rawad is not in this book. It produced another book.
Where I met Safaa also, just that, yeah, it's
and
that's
earlier with your case, Cole is in this book. And Simone Fatal has her sculpture on the cover of the book. So Post Apollo Press is in the book also in that way. It's a book that comes out of the work of Tamas, as you mentioned, and Tamas is you know, an art nonprofit organization that Sarah Riggs and myself run, and that was founded 20 years ago. And that purports to do kind of artistic, intercultural work. So it's often work at some border of art forms or of languages. And tamas, the word, is a word in Arabic that means a point of contact or the fact of touching or of being in contact. You can think of it as some kind of tangent. And it could be also understood as a metaphor for translation, perhaps. And one of the activities, one of the most enduring and regular actions and activities that Tamas has done over the years is to hold a yearly summer translation seminar. And this is a reading from one of the translation seminars with Habib Tangour, Algerian poet, and Cole Swensen. And the idea of the seminar is simply, and it was run for many years by Cole and Sarah together. And the idea is to bring poets together, 10 poets, 12 poets, into these temporary assemblages, 2 by 2, with the idea that each poet brings a certain amount of work and that the pairs translate each other. So everybody who's participating in the seminar is a poet, and everybody who's participating in the seminar is a translator, not ontologically, but by fact. That's the activity of it. And it's the wager that translation is not to not use translation simply as a kind of utilitarian activity that produces text into another language, but that translation is part and parcel of the activity of writing poetry, and that it can be used not as an instrument of legibility, but as in a horizontal fashion in this way. And the seminar took place in Paris, where Sarah and I used to live over many years, and then COVID came, and it was virtual, etc. And at some point, Tracy said, you've been inviting a number of Arab poets to the seminar. So the seminar involved various languages over the years. It was a lot of French and English, but also other languages. And after a while, it seemed that there had been enough Arabic language or Arab poetry, I guess, involvement in the seminar that it merited a kind of extraction in a way, and that was Tracy's idea. So we decided to go with it and to try. And it produced this book, which I like to call a non-anthology, simply because we did not wake up one day thinking we need an anthology or another anthology of Arabic poetry, and what will we put in it? It was more like there has been this organic production of work in the context of the seminar that has involved Arab poets of all sorts of different kinds, Arab poets who live in their home countries, Arab poets in the diaspora, Arab poets who write in Arabic or who write in French or who write in English. It seemed like an interesting way to showcase Arabic or Arab poetry in ways that it hasn't before, in the sense that, for instance, oftentimes in the pairs included in the book, it's an Arab poet translating another Arab poet in another language. And not that that produces a better translation or a preferable translation, but more so that it kind of widens the scope of what we understand Arabic poetry to be from the inside in a way. It creates all of these interesting frictions and parallels. And so what the book has is 15 Arab poets from different countries who write in different languages. And each section is bilingual. So each text is available in its original language and in another language. And so it's Arabic French or Arabic English or French English. So the book is in 3 languages, but it's not a trilingual book because each text is in only 2 of the 3 languages. I like to think of it as a mix of abundance and incompleteness, and which I like very much. And I'm grateful that Tracy and Litmus Press agreed to go with this idea, which probably a mainstream kind of commercial press would not have. To not precisely, that's another way that it's a non-anthology. It doesn't, claim to give you something rounded and complete. We did add something to the poetry in this book, which I think has become very important to the book, which is that we've asked every poet and every translator in the book to write a statement, a kind of mini essay about their work, about their process, about the experience of the seminar. And yeah, for me, it's become one of the essential parts of the book. And if I can, maybe I'll just close with this. I'll read you a small paragraph from one of these statements. This is by Aya Nabi, who is an Egyptian poet who writes in Arabic, who was working with another Egyptian poet who writes in English, Sara Al-Kamil. And Aya says, "I prefer reading poetry in Arabic. I tell Sara that as I read her poems in English. My mind was spontaneously translating them into Arabic. She justifies this by saying she thinks primarily in Arabic and says how difficult it is for English to capture instances of Arab culture, such as the movie The Nightingale's Prayer, a poem by Mido Zuhair, or the expression, your neck is the size of a sesame seed, and how nuances could become lost in a different language. That's why this experience was defined for me by accepting that I wasn't working in the realm of translation in this typical sense. I wasn't moving something out of its original location and placing it elsewhere. I was returning something to its original form. I was pulling the poem by the hand and returning it to where it belonged."
Yeah, I mean, I think I can add a little bit to that. Just I think that that idea of that's a beautiful passage and way of thinking of the way that this collection kind of came together. And I think it's right. It's not a cataloging impulse. It is an organic impulse in a way. And so that there's the way that the seminars worked and those conversations and how those conversations evolve. And I think that part of the editorial conversations that we had in a way was sort of helping this collection find its form, I think. And I think it's really important in that way to allow, not to impose some balance of the languages which didn't exist. And where, okay, are we going to get everything translated and everything's going to be presented in English, French, and Arabic? And that isn't how it happened. And so I think there's some real value in sort of in allowing that to exist in that form. And whereas with Safaa's book, where we really had both texts and we could kind of de-emphasize we could make this point of, one of these texts isn't more important than the other. This book can be read in both ways. And so I think that feels really important, is to sort of allow the work to, you know, find its form in the book. So. And I just love this photo. This was me taking a photo from the mic at Yumna Tlala's book launch for her book, The Paper Camera. So this is several years ago, but so just thought this was a nice image to end on with the audience. So.
What a great presentation that just covered so much. It was really, really brought it alive. I was noticing how much the form of a constellation, both for the collection of the Another Room to Live In and the structure of Litmus, seems to be, as I say, a constellation in the sense it's all these different bright points that some are nearer to others and some are not, but they all connect in these different ways. And I wondered where you see it going, what's going to get added to the constellation, anything changing?
Yikes. Anything changing? I think that we've had a lot of change this year. In fact, I think the closing of SPD is a real point of evaluation. I mean, it's a reckoning in a way, I think. And importantly, I mean, I think we need to, and actually this is maybe a good moment to say that we are working with Asterism Books. So we're in the process of moving all of our books. They'll all be available, including all the post-Apollo books and the O books and Burning Deck books, which is exciting. But I think that if I can just say, the thing about the SPD warehouse is that it was an archive, and for all of whatever the reasons why it didn't survive and the controversies and the upheavals over the years, it started as a bookstore. That's how I first encountered a lot of these writers. That's where I first encountered Keith and Rosemary's work, Burning Deck books. It was a small bookstore, and that became this distributor. And so there really was an archive there. And I think one of the scary things was this moment of nobody's really paying attention to the Burning Deck books. They'd been donated to SPD. But there's this really amazing archive there. And I think, and my hope with Asterism is that there's a real understanding of that there's not, they said when we were talking to them, we're not as focused on front list, back list. Like, we're looking at, these publishing projects as a sort of whole. And I think that's really important with so much of this work, that in the moment of its creation was already had a very small audience, right? And so we have to tend to that, because I think that the ideas and the poetics and so much of that work are so crucial and so relevant, to they continue to speak to the world that we're living in and that we're all trying to navigate and contend with. And I'm not answering your question, but so I guess that's to say, we've been in this moment of, in some ways I find myself really feeling like, we're not a big professional press. We never will be. And we all work really hard. There's a small staff. We're all poets and writers, and everybody on the board is poet, writer, artist, translator. And, I think that if we need to, I guess here's the connection to how we do books, is we need to work the way that we can work, right? We can't sort of force this small project into a more professional or sort of a structure that doesn't relate to how we are working and operating in the world. And so I think I'm really grappling with that right now. What does that mean? You know, we have responsibilities to our authors, to everybody we publish, and our very small staff is paid, and that's a responsibility and a commitment. And so there's we need some stability, but we also need to be able to operate in these sort of more fluid, maybe idealistically, I'd say slightly more anarchic way of operating. And that feels fundamental to the work, the thinking, and the way of being in the world that I think so many of the people that we're publishing are doing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, that probably still doesn't answer your question, but that's, there are a lot of questions on the table right now. And I think it is sort of looking at it as an ecosystem, and how do you tend to an ecosystem? Yeah.
And the logistics, the fact that there are these things like distribution that make all the difference too.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the time. I just want to thank you, Safaa, Omar, Tracy, for all your great comments. It really brought out, again, so many important aspects of it. And I know that there are a couple questions, so maybe time to segue toward the question and answers.
Sure. Thank you, Cole. And thank you so much, Tracy, Omar, and Safaa. This has been really, really inspiring. It's been wonderful to hear your readings as well. We do have some great questions from the audience today. And our first question will be from Susan B. Susan, feel free to unmute.
Well, it's not quite a question since I'm a member of the board and also published by Litmus in the past, but I really also wanted to talk a little bit or mention that there's been incredible artist and poet collaborations that Litmus has published. And since they published 2 of my books with Johanna Drucker in an accessible form, because I usually do very high priced, limited edition, one-of-a-kind books. And we were able to do Fabulous Feminae and our Off-World Fairy Tales with Litmus, and it was just a wonderful experience. And I think it's an unusual press because it has such a wide range. In other words, you've seen some aspects of it, but also they did this wonderful book this year, which wasn't mentioned, but I love, which is Nancy Bowen and Elizabeth Willis's Witch book, which is a fascinating collaboration between someone Liz Willis, whose ancestor was a witch at Salem, who was judged by Nancy Bowen's ancestor, who was the judge at the trial in Salem. And things like that Litmus is able to do, which not every press would take on, because it's, it involves imagery, it involves color printing, which nobody wants to do. A lot of complications, I think, have made the press really an incredible resource. And I just want to say that I'm so grateful that it exists, and that Tracy has taken all of this on, especially since Leslie Scalapino died, and who was a friend of mine. And I'm just grateful that you're able to continue her work. So it's more of a comment than a question.
Thank you, Susan. I also it's wonderful to see your paintings in the background, and of course your artwork I remember on the last issue of War and Peace, vision and text that Leslie and Judith published. And just, I mean, I think your close friendship with Leslie is also how, we became, one of the ways in which we became.
Yeah, it's very interesting because you didn't show that cover, but the painting that's on the cover was the biggest painting I've ever painted. It was, like 6 feet long. And Leslie actually bought the painting. So not only did she publish the work, but she actually purchased the painting out of a show at AIR, which was fantastic. It just had to be shipped to California, but that was, it was another story.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate the comment. I mean, I think, you know, there's just sort of we could do a whole other segment on poet artist collaborations, which is definitely, you know, has become an important sort of vein in the things that we've done. And so, yeah, thank you for mentioning it.
We're going to move on to the final reading for today, which will be from Tracy. So thank you for this amazing conversation, and I'll turn it to Tracy for reading.
It was really, the drilling had stopped at about 12:30. I don't know if you all can hear it, but it's like right over my head. So I apologize that perhaps I'm keeping a little bit thrown off. So I'm going to read from just a few pages from a work that's very much in process. Speaking of finding form, I think that's sort of the thing I'm working around most, or working with most at this point, and sort of currently thinking of a vertical canon, and a canon in the musical sense. And that's all I can really say about it. I don't have sort of more of that, but I think because there's these sort of threads that I've been writing and that are relating to each other. And so anyway, just to say that this is probably not the last form that this work will take. And I'm working with a title, Orchid Memory, which is referring to the bee orchid, which the only record we have of the bee is extinct, the bee that pollinates this particular orchid. And so all we know of what that bee might look like is the orchid's interpretation of that bee, which I just think is kind of an amazing metaphor. And I have a quote, epigraph from Leslie. Seen leaveless forest in dream by looking. I dreamt my torn hand between thumb and index finger, wing-like, but of broken skin. Flayed, translucent, blood red and impossibly thin, yet larger, it was my whole hand. Deviant dream arms at all angles, contortionist arrangements, cry out. Figure 1, defined by lack of light. Out of chaos, the birds repeat motions. The edges, rehearsed horizons. Looking at my hands, only fingers. There are poppy seeds swimming under the nail of my thumb. I am showing this to you. Figure 1, drawn nightward by dawn, draws circles in circles, reverting to fugue. Figure 1 is past, is spiraling, is alphabetic. Flames like vapor engulf, surrounding woods, the home. The bird escapes. I slip with the bird under the black surface of the lake as gusts of flame blow over and consume everything. To surround the empty space at the center in darkness. Figure 1, one's voice, collapses, ignited, inward, on the cusp of night. dream rage, so complete, consuming, comprehensive. It is one's whole body psyche at once, exploding all limits. In rage, shadows, figure 1 reveals again and again, words insufficiently adhere, tragic syntax, flown into night as dreams, or fates, or air, or fury, or day, or sleep, or death, or discord, or love, or dawn, or deception, or strife, or madness, or sky, syntactical progeny. The continual revisiting in dreams, who appears in relation, who does not, non-linear negation. Emerge as if from stone. The canvas then is the dilemma. It figures of wreckage. A canvas merges as if a line, one, from which figure 1 emerges. Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. Yeah.
That was
Thank
really
you.
beautiful, Tracy. Thank you. Thank you so much, Omar and Safaa and Cole, for the amazing discussion as well, and for the beautiful readings.
And thanks to the Rail too, to Eleanor, and to Chloe, and to Fong, and to everybody there that puts it together.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you for tuning in. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring the NSE and for supporting our archive, which you can explore on our YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 23 years, and a donation will support our writers, production staff, and operations. So we hope you'll consider supporting us through the link in the chat. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation between Amy Silman and Charles Bernstein on the event of To Be Otherwise at Gladstone Gallery. It will be our final NSE before our program's summer break from June to August. And throughout the summer, we encourage you to join us in exploring our archive, and you can register for our newsletter to receive updates on our archive and themed newsletters throughout the summer. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all.
Thank you, Cole.
Thank you, and everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks.